Hello, dear friends. Welcome back to my YouTube channel, Mukesh English. This is Mukesh Soni. In this video, I have brought to you a very famous poem by Dylan Thomas titled "The Force That Through the Green Fuse Drives the Flower." And this poem is written by a famous Welsh poet, Dylan Thomas. Let's know about the poet. Dylan Thomas was born on 27th October 1940 and passed away on 9th November 1953. Although Although he wrote exclusively in the English language, and he has been acknowledged as the most important Welsh poets of the 20th century, as a Welsh poet and as a writer, his works include the poems titled Do Not Go Gentle into That Good Night, another one, and Death Shall Have No Dominion, as well as another poem, Play for Voices Under Milkwood. He also wrote stories and radio broadcasts. He became very popular in his lifetime and remained so after even his death at the age of 39 in the New York City. He is a very noted person for his original, rhythmic, and ingenious use of words and imagery. That's about Dylan Thomas. Now, about the poem, a brief introduction about the poem, brief information about the poem. The poem titled The Force That Through the Green Fuse Drives the Flower. It's a poem by the Welsh poet Dylan Thomas, which has made the poet himself very famous. It was written in 1933 when Thomas was about 19 years old. It was published in his 1934 collection of 18 poems. So it is one of the 18 poems and which belongs to what has been called Thomas Womb Tomb period. It deals with the creation, both physical and poetic, the temporal process of birth, death, and rebirth. The poem was the inspiration for a series of paintings by Seri Richard, which was done between 1943 to 1945. The Force That Through the Green Fuse, a poem. It's very formal, very short poem, which is full of rich imagery and textured language. The theme of the poem is of universal energy, of natural forces, and their presence within the human psyche. This is a short poem with a tight structure. There are four stanzas each with 5 lines and a final couplet which rounds off the poem with 22 lines along 22 lines. Although it's written in the iambic pentameter, which is very dominant, where the 5 stresses per line, the third line in all the 4 stanzas, the third line is exceptionally very short line. So now let's know some more brief information, the introduction about the poem. The poem published in 1934, it expresses the themes in the style of Thomas' early work. It's a very philosophical poem. It aims at rendering the concept of dynamism in nature, that process of creation and decay, birth and death, liking man to natural elements. The 4 stanzas and the closing couplet propose the theme of 4 parallel ways with slight variations. The auditory elements, the words, images, they all create a careful pattern of correspondence and contrast, while the changing sounds in the poem suggest a sense of movement and energy just as in nature. On its most basic level, the poem describes a cycle of life and death, noting that creation and destruction are the part of the same process, both for man and for nature. Each stanza of this poem presents a flow of time moving to its inexplorable conclusion. The poem surveys 5 different scenes illustrating the destructive and the creative power of time. Beginning with the force of a fuse, it continues with a force like powering water, the hand whirling, the lips leeching, and the crooked worm. In just 5 stanzas, Dylan Thomas addresses wide-reaching themes, example, life, death, and the passage of time. The most important key of the poem is here a link which is between the nature and the humans that is explored through the continuous references comparing the life the poet feels in himself and to the life which he sees through the running through the natural world. So that's a introduction of this poem. Now there are few difficult vocabulary or few difficult glossary in this poem. We can have some discussion. Quicksand. Quicksand here describes a picture of a hand image that stirs the water and also stirs the quicksand. Here in this stanza, the poet brings many positive and negative images, which gives us a kind of visual image of a force, a kind of force which is moving the water into the pool, something like moving a quicksand. Next one is here, how holes my shroud sail. It's an effort to drag by the force in a sail and connected to the wrapping of the cloth for the burial of the human body, a sign of destruction. Hangman's lime means to say dumb, to tell the man is hanged or dead. That means to say it alludes to a larger circle and the power of interconnectivity of life on earth. I'm dumb to tell the lover's tomb. So here the poet examines the thoughts of sustenance and death. So here love is an eternal force buried with the dead in a tomb, reminding the time's inability. So let's begin the poem with the stanza number 1. The force that through the green fuse drives the flower, drives my green age that blasts the roots of trees is my destroyer, and I am numb, I am dumb to tell the crooked rose my youth is bent by the same wintry fever. I repeat, the poet says, the force that through the green fuse drives the flower, drives my green age that blasts the roots of the trees is my destroyer, and I am dumb to tell the crooked rose my youth is bent by the same wintry fever. So the very first stanza here, it's setting the fundamental theme of this poem. There is a force, and the same force works on nature, and the same force works on men through a process of creation and destruction, birth and decay. So this concept is expressed here through a statement or through a counterpart statement or maybe a refrain. So in the first stanza of this poem, the speaker begins by making the use of the line, saying that the use of the line which becomes the title of the poem. He describes how a force moves through the green fuse. Green fuse means to say a stem, a flower, and this drives the flower. Because of this force, it gives a power to the flower. From just the first line, the tone is serious, but the content suggests that something very much positivity is here, and this force, whatever it may be, it makes the flower live. So this force, it makes the flower live, okay, because it gives a power to the green fuse. In the next line, the poet mentions that both drives his own green age and blasts the roots of the trees. That means it makes him young. Green here refers to it makes him young as well as powerful. Drives in green age, it makes him young as well as powerful, but blasts the roots of the trees. But in the end, the same force destroys him. The same force makes him powerful. The same force makes him ever young, but the same force destroys him. At the same time, it has a similar influence on plants. So the time has the same influence on plants. There's a comparison here. What kind of comparison? There is a comparison growing between natural imagery and the speaker's imagery. The speaker suggests to be just impacted by the force and as the rest of the nature is. So in the next two lines, the poet mentions that he says he's numb. Numb means he's unable to speak to the crooked rose. He's not able to speak to the crooked rose. He's unable to communicate with the flowers to tell them that they are controlled by the same force, the force which is also overpowering the poet. See here, the force of time, which is controlling the human being, the force of time is also controlling the flowers here. So the poet is unable to communicate to the flowers, saying that he is dumb. He is unable to speak to the crooked rose that the plants are also controlled by the same force. The same wintry fever moves through both of them. The same kind of fever, the same kind of wintry fever, the same kind of death and decay is going through the both, not only to the human beings, but also to the flowers. So at this point in this poem, there might be many possible interpretations one could have in regard to what this force is. Many people can think that what kind of this force is. So here, among all these forces, the poet is talking about the time. So here, force he refers to the time which has the power to make the human beings happy. All right, the time which has the power to make the plants and the flowers to grow, right? The same time which has the power to make the human beings happy or green or young, powerful. At the same time, it blasts the roots of the trees. At the same time, it also destroys him. But the poet says that he's unable to tell, he's unable to speak to those crooked rows because these crooked rows are also controlled by the same powerful force, that is the time. Now let's move to the stanza number 2. The force that drives the water through the rocks drives my red blood, that dries the mouth, that dries the mouthing streams, turns mine to wax, and I am dumb to mouth unto my veins. How at the mountain spring the same mouth sucks. To repeat, the force that drives the water through the rocks drives my red blood, that dries the mouthing streams, turns mine to wax, and I am dumb to mouth unto my veins. How at the mountain spring the same mouth sucks. So here, in this second stanza, the speaker, the poet, is again coming back to the same force and is again telling the readers that it drives the water through the rocks, just as it drives my red blood. The poet says that I'm talking about the same force, and this force again has the same ability to drive the water through the rocks. At the same time, the same force has the ability to drive my red blood. So here there's a metaphor for time. The force is like a metaphor for time, and this force has the ability to create as well as to destroy. It moves one's blood to power their youth, but inevitably also moves them towards a death. So the same force has the ability to give the blood to strengthen the body or to make the person always ever young. At the same time, this force, this time force, has the power to move the person towards the death. So here, just like earlier, just like earlier, the poet was unable to communicate to the flower, because here also the same thing. The speaker is unable to communicate his interconnectedness to the flower. He is also unable to speak to the mountain spring. He says that I am dumb to mouth unto my veins. How at the mountain spring at the same mouth sucks. He says that just like earlier, he was unable to speak to the flowers. Now here also the poet is unable to speak to the those mountain spring. This is the power of time reflected by the poet. So let's move to the stanza number 3. Stanza number 3, the poet says, the hand that whirls the water in the pool stirs the quicksand that ropes the blowing wind, howls my shroud sail, and I am dumb to tell the hanging man how of my clay is made the hangman's lime. I repeat, the hand that whirls the water in the pool stirs the quicksand that ropes the blowing wind, holds my shroud sail, and I am dumb to tell the hanging men how of my clay is made the hangman's lime. So here there's an image of a ship image. So the third stanza, it brings many more positive and negative images in the picture. We can imagine a lot of positive and the negative images in the third stanza. The speaker describes here, he says, how the hand, that is a visual image of force, how the hand moves the water in the pool, but at the same time the same hand stirs the quicksand too. So this is how the force, the hand has a force, the hand has a very visual force, and this hand can control the life, that is water in the pool, and also the death that can stress the quicksand. So here the poet describes the force of time, power of time, by mentioning that the hand has the ability to water in the pool, to move the water in the pool. Same time, the same hand has the ability to stir the quicksand. So that means to say the force has the ability to control both life and death. The shroud, the word shroud, which is mentioned in the third line, the word shroud refers to the sail of a ship. A ship is moving, which is very much positive and powerful. Same time, it also give a reference to the clothes which is wrapped around the body after the death. Means to say around, which is wrapped around the dead body. So here it gives a reference to the both the things. The shroud gives a reference to both the things. One is the ship is moving on. That means to say the life. At the same time, it also gives a reference to the cloth which is wrapped around the dead body. So here the poet does not allow us to go along for a long without return to the darker side of time and life. He does not allow us to keep going on, keep thinking about time and life. So in the final two lines, what does the poet say? He says that he's dumb to tell the hanging man. Who is hanging man? A man who has been hanged or who has been executed. Why? Because the lime that covers a dead body is made of the same material as the body itself. The speaker who is living is a part of the dead, and the dead are a part of him. So here he is alluding again to the larger circle of life and the power of interconnectivity that runs through all the things on earth. So he's telling that there's a power of time which does not allow me to tell something to the person who has been hanged or executed, right? A hangman's lime. Lime means to say the dead body is covered with some material, right? So here this stanza talks about the circle of life. What is the circle of life? Circle of life is itself a life and death. So there's a power of interconnectivity which runs through all the things on this earth. So now let's move to the stanza number 4. The poet says, the lips of time leach to the fountain head. Love drips and gathers, but the fallen blood shall calm her sores. And I am dumb to tell a weather's wind how time has ticked a heaven round the stars. Repeat. The lips of time leach to the fountain head. Love drips and gathers, but the fallen blood shall calm her source, and I am dumb to tell a weather's wind how time has ticked a heaven round the stars. Very interesting stanza. So, in the final 5 line stanza, the force is personified once again. So, again, we find here, anyway, in the whole poem, the force, the word force is personified, that he refers to the power of time. So, force is personified and it now has lips. It has now lips that drink from the fountain of time. This force has the lips which can drink from the fountain of time. It is like a leech which is sucking the water that falls to the ground, just like love. So, that love once landed, and what kind of love is this? It's called fallen blood. The love which is which falls down, I mean to say, which is landed here, that's called fallen blood. So, rather than water, instead of water, love is coming from the fountain. The poet would like to say here, more than water, love is coming from the fountain, and it's a new source of life on earth. And this source of life on earth is sucked up by time. It is sucked by time. So here we can remember the reference here. There's again a reference to water, youth, vitality. We have seen there was a reference to water, youth, vitality in the second stanza. So these again, all these things have been reflected once again in this fourth stanza. So again in this stanza, in the third line, we find there's a pronoun here, her. So the her, the speaker refers to the time again. The time again speaker has mentioned her with reference to time. Time needs the power and vitality of water in order to exist. After the refrain in this stanza, the poet says that he can't tell the wind about time's power. Here, the poet is speaking about entire universe. He's telling that I can't tell the winds that what is the time's power, because he's talking about the entire universe. He's talking about the entire universe creation, its solidity, but also its very strange nature. Very strange nature of time, that time is destroyer as well as a creator. So again, he's alluding to how there is no true beginning or end in the universe. He says that there is no perfect beginning and there is no perfect end in the universe, because time is very much complex and unknowable as the universe itself. The way we can't understand the universe, similarly, we can't understand the force of time. We don't know the force of time. It is as complex, as unknowable as the universe itself. So this is about stanza number 4. Now, the last 2 lines, which are called as a couplet. The poet says, "And I am dumb to tell the lover's tomb how at my sheet goes the same crooked worm." So we have seen here till the 4 stanzas, till the 5 stanzas, till now, the poet has been using the refrain, the expression, "and I am dumb," even for the last line. And the couplet here refers to the lover's tomb. As we already seen in the 4th stanza, love is one of the life sustaining elements that time really needs it. Time needs a love. Why? Because love is one of life's sustaining element. So here we find that it's a representation of life. And in this stanza, the love is dead. The love is no more. Why? Because it is depicted in the form of a tomb. And tomb always reminds about the dead people, those are no more. So it reminds the readers of time's ability to destroy everything. When you talk about tomb, we talk about death. So that means to say the time has the ability to talk or to describe the death. So time's ability to destroy everything. So this is what the poet says in this poem. Now, in nutshell, let's bring back all the important elements of this poem. So the poem, The Force That Through the Green Fuse Drives the Flower, composed by a famous Welsh poet, Dylan Thomas. It's a very complex poem, and it uses an extended metaphor to speak about the themes of time, life, love, and death. The poet takes the reader through a number of scenarios in which the poet compares himself to the other form of life. And he speaks about a power in his body that moves his blood, but also moves the water in rivers and stirs quicksand. So here he has spoken about the power, the force, and this force is time. And this force has the ability to move his blood, but also has the ability to move the water in the rivers and stirs the quicksand. Again, the poet talks about the same force which has the ability to destroy life and remake it. So throughout the text, we have seen the poet is using a refrain. What's the refrain? The expression, and I am dumb. This refrain the poet is using to express his inability to communicate with these other elements of the world and convey to them the nature of time. He's unable to convey, he's unable to communicate with other elements of the world about what? About the nature of the time. So, but at the end of the poem, we can see that the poet has admitted that, the poet has accepted that the nature is impossible to understand. You can't understand the nature. It's very, very impossible. So, dear friends, this is how I put a bit effort to explain, to analyze this poem. Thank you so much. If you have liked this poem, click on the like button, write in the comment box. If you're not yet subscribed my channel, please do subscribe. Thank you once again. Dear friends, thank you so much for watching this video. You can reach me at mukeshenglish@gmail.com. Please do subscribe the channel, click on the like button for more videos on literature, workbook, pronunciation, grammar, communication skills, presentation skills, interview skills. Stay in tune with Mukesh English. Thank you once again.